Hi, you're watching Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and I thought I'd make this more off-the-cuff little video in response to something that I've been seeing happening on social media and even in the mainstream media and op-ed columns in the last day or so. Basically, in the wake of the Notre Dame fire, there are now people who are criticizing, attacking, and passing judgment upon the motives and the actions of those people who have made very generous contributions towards the restoration of Notre Dame in light of the fire and the damage that was done there. And I was sitting there thinking about this, and the more I read and the more I saw people sharing memes. For example, one of the memes I saw was a comparison between those who were giving money to Notre Dame and those who are starving in Africa and who are going without food. So they had a photo of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and then they had a photo of some African children with their hands out with begging bowls. And what was being suggested here was that these people who are giving money, they kind of really don't really care about the world. They were being criticized basically for the cause that they were choosing to give money to, in this case, to the restoration of Notre Dame. And I thought I'd make this video because as far as I'm concerned, this is both illogical and it's just petty, mean-spiritedness. Let me explain to you what I mean. And I'm going to look down at my laptop a little bit here, so please forgive me because, as I said, this is sort of more off the cuff and I've just taken some notes and I've got them sitting in front of me. But here's the four big problems, I think, with adopting this attitude. Number one, it assumes that these people are not already giving to those other causes. So if you make a comparison between, say, giving to Notre Dame and giving to the poor or giving to some environmental cause, as I've seen people doing, you're assuming that those people who have given money to the restoration of Notre Dame have not already given money previously to those other causes or are not already giving money to those previous causes. Now, I haven't seen any data to back that claim up, and so I don't know. But even if that is the case, and you are assuming that these people are somehow acting in bad faith, it's a bit of an absurd comparison. It's kind of a bit of a false dichotomy to suggest that somehow if you choose to give money to Notre Dame and you don't give it to, say, an environmental group, that somehow one is charitable and the other is not. I'll explain in a moment why giving money to the restoration of Notre Dame is actually a profoundly important act of charity. But it's an absurd comparison because the simple fact is that some people are going to give their money to lots of different causes. Some people are going to give their money to only one or two causes. Some people are only going to give their money to one cause, say, in their lifetime that they really care about. But it's an absurd comparison to make to suggest that just because they don't give to the cause that you want them to give their money to, that somehow they are failing in their care and their duty of care for their fellow human beings. They're not really acting in a charitable way. Secondly, this attitude assumes that the amount needed to repair Notre Dame would actually solve those other issues in the world. If we just took that money and threw it at those other issues, then somehow that would solve those problems. It seems to be a lot of people are talking, or certainly what I've seen, a lot of people and a lot of this commentary is talking as if you were to take that lump sum, which I understand at the time of recording this video is just under €1 billion, which sounds like a huge, and that is a huge sum of money when you sort of put it all in one place like that. But once you start to do the maths and think about the idea of parceling out this money into individual parcels to give to those in need. Let's say, for example, let's take one region. There was a meme I saw this evening which was comparing this to, say, poverty in Africa. Now, let's say you take that one region of Africa and you were to take that 1 billion, as I understand, it's not quite a billion yet, but €1 billion, and you were to parcel that out equally to every person living in Africa, then guess what? That would mean that each person living in Africa would receive less than €1 or less than $1 each, because there are more than 1.2 billion people who are living in Africa. So this issue is kind of a little bit more complicated than the simplistic notion that you should just take that money and if you throw it at that problem, that will somehow fix it. I would suggest that what you will probably do is you could bring some temporary relief to people in need, but you're not going to solve that problem. It's a lot more complex than just doing that. Now maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, what if you took the money and you gave it to aid organisations? Well, that wouldn't be a particularly good idea, I would suggest, because what you're doing then is you're taking that $1 billion and you are then giving it to organisations who are going to take a percentage of it to pay for their own administration costs. So even less of that money is going to end up in the hands of people who might need it, say in this case, for argument's sake, in Africa. But that's just one region. When you start adding in all the other regions of the world and all the other needs and all the other issues in the world that this money could go to, you realise that in actual fact, 1 billion euros, while it's a massive amount of money that most of us could only fantasize about seeing in our lifetime, it actually wouldn't be much more than a drop in the ocean. Now, it could do some good, but it's not going to solve these problems. Number 3, and this is really important, donating money to the restoration of Notre Dame is actually an act of charity, and it's an act of charity for the betterment of those in need. People are talking about this as if giving money to the restoration of Notre Dame is somehow not charitable. It actually is, and it's a profoundly good act of charity. How can that be? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me give you the 4 reasons why this is actually a profound act of good for humanity that you'd be doing if you gave money to that cause. First of all, you are giving money to restore a place that will bring spiritual and psychological comfort to millions of people, not just today, but for decades or possibly even centuries to come. People will go to that place and they will find spiritual comfort, spiritual nourishment, encouragement, psychological comfort, nourishment, and motivation, etc. This building, once it's fully restored, this house of worship that people will come to, and people come to this place from all over the world, the impact of this place really can't be understated, and just how important that could be in the life of a person. This building and someone coming to visit it could literally be the difference between that person taking their own life or choosing to carry on living life to the fullest. That's how profound the impact of this place could be. And so I would suggest to you, on that level alone, this is already on a par with providing, say, for the material needs of another person who might be in desperate need. Secondly, if you give money to the Notre Dame cause, then what you are doing is you are giving money to restore an important historical treasure. You are actually giving those people who are alive today and future generations as well, because this is important. It's not just for today, it's also for future generations. You are giving them the gift of their heritage and their patrimony, because this building is a profoundly important piece of heritage. It is a profoundly important part of our Western history. Not just for people who live in France, but wider Europe and also the wider West. It has profound significance, and it's not just about the building itself and the history wrapped up in it. It's not just about the age of the building. It's not just about the relics and the artworks and everything else that's there. There's things like, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I remember reading about this some years ago, I believe the world's oldest, most continuously operating hospital is attached to the side of the cathedral at Notre Dame. So, this place has some pretty important significance, and giving people the gift of their heritage, this is a really important cultural touchstone. So, to actually give people that touchstone where they can actually go and be present, the impact of encountering history in that way cannot be understated. Again, the impact of this and the gift of this place and how much it could actually shape the world in profoundly positive ways at both a sort of individual, personal level and at a wider societal level really can't be understated. Thirdly, if you give money to the restoration of Notre Dame, then what you are doing is you are giving money to restore a place of wondrous beauty. It's a place where you go and you are impacted by the magnificence and the beauty of that place. And I would argue that this is probably one thing the world is desperately lacking today, is authentic beauty, places of authentic beauty, moments of authentic beauty. And it really can't be understated how an encounter with wondrous beauty, the magnificence of something that's really truly quite beautiful, can actually shape the world in profoundly positive ways on both a personal and a societal level. The ability for a place like this to be a place of inspiration for all sorts of good to come into existence in the world really can't be understated. And that's what these people are giving their money to. Fourthly, You are giving money to restore a building where millions of people will visit for decades or possibly even centuries to come. And if they come into that place when the mass, the church service is being held, and they hear the preaching there, and a lot of people from all around the world, this is a real tourist hotspot, do come to this place. And if they come to that place and they are there when the preaching is being preached, one of the most common messages that they will hear in that place, in that particular building, is that they should care for the vulnerable and they should give to those in need. So by restoring this place, you are allowing that message to go out wide. And for a lot of people to be profoundly challenged, to give of the good of their life and the goods that they possess for the betterment of the world. So for those 4 reasons, this is a profound act of charity that has implications not just for the here and now, but across the globe and across time even. And not just for this particular issue, but all those other issues that people are making comparisons with. This is the irony, is that this building could be a motivation for millions of people to actually go and do something about those other issues that you're claiming giving this money won't actually help. And number 4, my 4th and final point here is this, that if you're a Christian who is tempted to engage in this sort of virtue signaling, you might want to actually stop and take a read of the words of Jesus in the Gospels and then seriously reconsider your position. Because if we read from the Gospel of John, chapter 12, there is a particular incident that happened in the life of Jesus where he critiqued this exact same type of judgment. People, or in this case, someone judging another person for how they were spending their money and not giving that money to the poor. Let me read to you from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 2 to 8. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at table with him. Then Mary took out a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray Jesus, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. So as you can see, this is a very expensive gift that has been poured out on the feet of Jesus here. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And this is the really important bit, because this is Jesus' response to this criticism from Judas. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. So there it is. It's as explicit as it gets. Jesus is saying, don't be Judas. People who are adopting this attitude of criticizing other people for the generous giving that they are making towards the restoration of Notre Dame, they are engaging in the very behavior of Judas that Jesus criticized. So if you're a Christian who's doing this, you might want to seriously reconsider what you're doing, I would suggest. You might also want to reconsider, based on those important words from Scripture, judge not, lest you be judged. Because in the midst of all of this virtue signaling and this judgment passing that you're doing on these other people and suggesting that maybe they don't really care about the world or what they're doing is not good enough, maybe you should stop to actually ask yourself this one very important question. What am I doing with all of the riches I possess? The mere fact that you're able to jump on social media and pass judgment on these people suggests that you are actually in a position of wealth and privilege that a lot of people in the world aren't in today. You have technology and wealth and things at your disposal that enable you to do that. So what are you doing with the riches that you possess? What are you actually doing? In the midst of all of your virtue signaling and declaring your righteousness and passing judgment on these other people for their lack of righteousness and their supposed sins, what are you actually doing? Because that's the most important question you can ask. In fact, I know that it might be, a finger pointed at everyone out there who's doing this, but there's also, I guess, as the old saying goes, there's a whole lot. Whenever I point the finger at you, there's at least 3 other fingers pointed back at me when I do this. And so it's an important question for me to ask of myself as well, constantly. And I'm trying to do that more and more now, is what am I doing actually with what I've been given? What am I doing to bring goodness, truth, and beauty to the world? It's very easy to sit there and criticize and, those people, they're so horrible. They're real sinners. They're not really good people. Don't thank them for what they're doing. Ooh, yuck. It's very easy to do that. It's a lot harder to actually be good, to do virtuous things, to actually transform the world by acts of self-giving love. That takes a lot more effort, and that's why we're all so comfortable, and I include myself again in this, with sitting there and virtue signaling and not actually doing much about the world. That's the beauty about virtue signaling. You get to signal to the world how virtuous you are, but when you signal to the world how virtuous you are, what it actually signals is that you lack virtue. One of the most fundamental virtues straight away is missing, and that's the virtue of humility. And that's what virtue signaling is built on the back of ego. It's built on the back of condemnation. Often it's built on the back of a rush to judgment too, without even understanding or knowing there's people. There's no sort of prudence in it. It doesn't signal virtue at all, but it's nice and comfortable and easy to do. I would also suggest that these people who have given this money, they were damned if they did and damned if they didn't. If they hadn't have done it, then I'm sure a lot of people would have been critical. Why aren't people who've got money giving to this cause to restore Notre Dame? It's this beautiful place. Why don't they give their money to it? And then they do give their money, and what do they get? They get people saying, look at those people. They don't really care about the environment or the poor. They're giving to some cathedral in France. Now, I know I'm sort of exaggerating for effect there, but I think there's something to that caricature I've just portrayed there, in the sense that I think this is a very petty and unintelligent nastiness to actually be engaging in. And it's happening because people haven't properly reasoned their way to this opinion. They haven't stopped to think about what they're actually saying and what it really means, and to think more deeply and more broadly about this issue. Or it's happening because people have spent just far too much time drinking from a cup of bitterness, and now that bitterness just flows out of them. And this is one of those opportunities. They're just bitter in a moment where we shouldn't actually be bitter. There's a sort of weird jealousy. We can't accept an act of goodness for what it is. We have to pass judgment. We have to condemn, even in the face of something that is profoundly good and generous on the part of another person to actually do. That's all I want to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please consider financially supporting the channel. The links for how to do that are found in the video description below. See you next time on Left Foot Media.